I just got a text like, "Would you be up for going to South America for 6 weeks?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I could find time for that. Sure, yeah."
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. Tonight, I have the huge pleasure of introducing to you Mr. Bob Fridzema. So Bob is currently the Hammond B3 and keyboard man for the iconic Glenn Hughes. But as you'll hear during our interview, he's done a whole lot more than that with some iconic artists. And he's a true blues aficionado, killer player. We get an excellent tour of his studio and some amazing old gear as well. I do highly recommend hanging around for that. His perspective on teaching and a whole range of other stuff. So, yeah, I think you'll enjoy this a great deal, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Bob, cannot thank you enough for joining us, particularly in your case. You're around 48 hours away from going out on tour.
Oh, that's true. We're starting a European tour soon.
And I noticed for quite a while, and we'll talk about that in a little while. So, but yeah, it's lovely having you on board. And I just thought we'd start off finding out a little bit about your early years. So just tell us about your childhood, teenage years, and what developed in you a passion for music.
Well, I think I started playing keyboards when I was like 7. I don't remember, but my parents always tell me that I saw a kid play a keyboard somewhere. It must have been like a fair or some kind of demonstration of the local music school, and I apparently was obsessed with this keyboard. So I hounded my parents to get one, and they did the supportive parents thing. They got me a keyboard, they got me lessons, and I think in hindsight it was a positive thing. I didn't go to the local, like the official music school, the council music school. I went to the sort of the unofficial one that was run by conservatory students and jazz students and kind of a bit more free, open-minded guys who were playing themselves, who were active themselves. And I quickly kind of leaned towards... I remember really loving Boogie Woogie when I was a kid. I started playing Boogie Woogie stuff when I was like, I don't know, 10. And I had guys teaching me that were just really into that, and they were really into jazz and general, just, pop music at the time. So I was able to just explore really whatever I wanted to do. And that's been really nice. I didn't have to stick to a certain course. I didn't have to stick to like, oh, you got to study your scales. And that might have been good in hindsight, but I was able to just explore my own musicality and my own kind of, whatever I wanted to do. And that's been really good. And when I was 14, I think I started playing in my first little school band. I was in a high school that was really supportive of the creative arts. They had a big theater department, and the school band, which was very heavily subsidized, was also backing up all the plays. They were backing up all the events basically that the school had. So I was able to just play a lot, which was really nice. And just get introduced to people who were also playing music, because it can be a bit lonely. I remember as a kid just sitting behind the piano, and my mom really loved my playing, but it was a bit like, yeah, that's great, Mom, but I kind of also want to get out there and meet other people.
And it sounds like those high school years here would have been very important, Bob, because I know for myself as well, that's when you do get out there and show your work. Do you remember some of the music you were playing back then, and did it have an influence on you in later years? Was there either music you discovered that you were playing that you fell in love with, or stuff like that?
Well, I remember that the repertoire was very heavily sort of decided upon by the guitar players in the band. And it was a lot of like that 90s stuff. I remember they were really into this band from Belgium, Case Choice and Heather Nova, and I'm Only Happy When It Rains. What's that band again?
Yeah, Garbage.
Garbage, yeah. There was a lot of that stuff around, and there was a lot of music, coming out at the time, which was really cool. So we just played a lot of just whatever. And I do know that the singer in the band, who also played a little guitar and a little bit of everything, he was really into bluesy type stuff, which has always been my thing. So I was able to kind of learn sort of the pop music at the time, and also play a little bit of blues and do a little bit of soloing and just a little bit of everything. And I definitely got thrown into the deep end as far as like figuring out keyboard parts where there are no keyboard parts yet.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Bob, and it's one that most of us players deal with on a regular basis. How did you go about working that out? And even nowadays, how do you ensure that you play a tasty part that's not getting in the way of everything else?
That's something I try to figure out every time I play, really. I feel that because I play a lot of Hammond organ, which is really my thing. And luckily, Hammond organ, if you just crank everything, you get a really distorted, nice sound. So I remember playing with Bernie Marsden, a few years ago, and it's a lot of the Whitesnake stuff is two guitars, doubling up on parts, and basically when Bernie would start soloing, I would just crank it and go into like full overdrive. I remember a friend of mine saying that he couldn't really tell that there was a guitar missing at that point because the Hammond would just take over that role. So that's one way of doing it, but that can be a bit heavy. But it's always a challenge. Piano has a tendency to stand out a bit too much sometimes. So you got to sort of pick your frequencies, pick your moments. Don't try and do too much, and try filling the space. I always try to kind of fill out as much as I can without being in the way. Hammond is good for that, just padding and trying to find that sweet spot. And when it comes to piano chords or electric pianos, I just try to go kind of heavy, kind of dark, so you're not standing out, but you're filling up all that sort of space that kind of drops out if a guitar player goes to a solo.
Yeah. No, great tips. No, thank you. And so I do want to do something a little bit different, Bob, because on your website you prominently mentioned that Hammond is your thing as Whirlies and Rhodes pianos. So I thought I'd go through each of those. What was your first interaction with the Hammond organ? So, and we all understand why we fall in love with Hammonds. They're just such an iconic instrument. But what was your experience?
Well, one of my first memories, music-wise, is being in the car with my dad, and he would play this Bernard Allison album that's actually on my Desert Island disc list. And I remember, I was maybe 7, maybe 8, who knows, 10 years old, and I remember just not really quite getting it. There was there was some singing, and there was some guitar playing, and there was some other stuff going on, and I asked my dad a lot of questions, and I do remember once I had keyboard lessons that I was still listening to this stuff and a lot of other blues, and I think I knew a lot of the instruments, kind of, I could identify what drums were and guitar and bass and keyboards, obviously. Until there was always one sound I couldn't quite figure out what that was. It's that like that swooping, whirling, whatever you want to call it, Hammond sound in the end. So I remember going to my teachers like, what is that? Just like particular bit in the music, like what is that? And he told me. And I think when I was 13 or 14, I just looked at the local, the gum tree of the Netherlands where I'm from, and just looked for a Hammond organ. So me and my dad went out and we managed to find a L100 somewhere. And I didn't even know what a Leslie was at this point. I just bought the Hammond and brought it home and figured, well, I'm good now. I've got a Hammond. Let's go. And it took me a while. It was a bit of a journey to figure out like what it all takes to sound, like what I heard of these records. I quickly realized an L100 on its own was not the sound. But, you live and you learn. And eventually a Leslie came in and I went through every clone imaginable, every kind of digital version of, until I managed to get the real stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. And so let's talk about the clones for a while. And I imagine, particularly with your touring, when you're touring in Europe, do you manage to bring a Hammond with you, or you are backlining clones a lot of the time?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the type of tour we're doing. We've done a bunch where you literally just fly from one place to the next. And then it just, especially when you're doing festivals, it's just, I specify a Hammond and then I hope for the best. And sometimes they're great. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of work on them in sound check or in that quick little, turnaround between bands. Um, on the last few runs, for example, we flew to the UK and then we just rent backline locally. And then it's kind of always a bit of a back and forth between the backline company and me and management to kind of figure out, what do you have? What can we make work? I think on this European run we got coming up, we're renting an XK5 full, the full setup, double manual with the Leslie. So I'm excited about that. I think in the UK we used a Nord, a C2D. In the US, what do I have there? I think I had a C2D. No, actually, I used an SK2, a slightly
Oh,
older
yep.
model. But, with a Leslie, which I blew up on the first on the first gig. Yeah, we did a show at the Whiskey. That was the first show of the tour,
Oh,
pretty big one, and we had some guests. Bonamassa came down and Derek Sherinian.
wow.
And in sound check, they were going through Burn.
Oh,
Sherinian
yeah.
was playing, and he wasn't doing anything crazy, but the horn and the Leslie gave out, and we got a new one from the backline company, and I blew that one up too. So then I ended up doing the rest of the tour with a Neo Ventilator for a
Oh,
Leslie.
there you go. And how
Yeah.
did you find that, Bob? I mean, nothing compares to a real Leslie, but did you find it was usable for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I find
Yeah.
that. What goes out to the front of house sounds great. I think 99% of people, including keyboard players, don't really hear the difference. I've been in the room and I've heard a Neo ventilator and I couldn't tell, really.
Yeah.
There's details, there's things you can tell, but in a live setting, it's really hard. And I find, for me as a player, if I can get monitoring in stereo, like in-ears or stereo wedges, I find it really, really usable. There's a bit of it doesn't have the dynamic range a Leslie has from that like whisper quiet to screaming loud. It's a bit of a narrower bandwidth, I find, but in general it's very usable. And with Glenn, you're playing pretty much full blast most of the time.
That's right. So let's talk about Glenn Hughes, and that's who you're about to go out on tour with for the next couple of months or next few months. And so you've played with Glenn for a period of time. My first question's a bit of a funny one. Glenn appears to have a really elite club of organ players depending on where he's going. So I know you're obviously core. I know Mike Mangan's played with him, and I know Lachy Doley's doing the Australian part of his tour. Do you guys have secret
Yeah.
chapter meetings?
We should. No, well, I've been hanging out with Mike quite a bit because when we were out on our first run, we were out in Bulgaria, I think, and Mike was playing with the Cult, and he was in the same town on the same day, so we got to hang out for quite a bit, and we just completely geeked out over gear and how do you do this and how do you approach this, and I remember I sent a few messages to Lachy Doley too about just some gear questions and how do you approach this. But yeah, it rarely happens, multiple keyboard players in one place together. And I think the geek talk would be immense. Could be a lot of fun,
It could
but
be.
it rarely happens.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. And so how did you get the gig with Glenn in the first instance, Bob? So how did that come about?
Well, it's like it's always like a guy who knows a guy. When I moved to Denmark, because my wife is Danish, and I was living in the UK initially, but then we moved to Denmark. And one of the first things I did, I reached out to Jabo, who is a Danish keyboard player who played with Glenn. And I knew he was endorsed by Hammond, which I am too. And I figured, well, I'm in a new country. I need to make some new friends here. So I reached out to him. We went for coffee, and we hit it off, which was really nice. And that just led to me filling in for him sometimes on some local Danish gigs. And I was even up for filling in for him on a Glenn Hughes tour, which I was very excited. This was years ago, and it didn't work out, unfortunately. So I just kind of never really thought about it anymore because I figured, Jay was doing the gig. That's it. Corona happened. Glenn was with the Dead Daisies, so there wasn't really anything to, think about at that point. But then all of a sudden, I get a text from Soren, who I met. I was asked to fill in for a Danish artist called Jesper Binzer, who's also the singer for DAD, and Soren plays guitar in that. So I think Soren just kind of clocked me as like, oh, this guy can, do the rock thing on a Hammond. So I think when Glenn was gearing up to do a new tour on his own, Jabo couldn't do it, and Soren thought of me. So he just sent me a text, would you be available? And I think the first thing that we were up for doing was a South American tour.
Wow.
So I just got a text like, would you be up for, going to South America for 6 weeks? And I'm like, yeah, I could find time for that. Sure, yeah.
That's amazing. And so what sort of learning curve was it for you, Bob, to learn Glenn's, obviously the catalogue here, obviously there's Deep Purple stuff, there's a whole range of his own stuff. And what was the learning curve for you getting across all that music?
It was daunting at first because, there's a lot of sort of the rock stuff, let's say it correctly. The stuff that John Lord plays, a lot of it is sort of blues-based, which I'm really at home in. That sort of all came naturally, and he does a lot of power chord stuff, to kind of get that grungy, kind of almost guitar-like thing. So that all felt fairly natural, but the sort of the more classical influence and the sort of progressive things that he did, that was a bit outside of my realm at that point. So I just decided to basically listen to as much live stuff as I could. And listen to a lot, because there's, in almost every Deep Purple show and the live albums, there's a big sort of keyboard section in the middle where he just goes off and does stuff. So I kind of studied those, not to play them note for note, although I did learn a few, but to just kind of get his thinking in my head, to kind of get my and get some of those classical scales and classical progressions into my playing. And see where he goes with it, because it's very easy to just kind of do stuff in blues scale and it's not bad, but the John Lord thing requires a bit of that classical stuff in there. So I just tried to listen to as much as I could and write some stuff down and kind of brush up on my own classical stuff, because that's not my forte.
Yes. And did you have to audition, Bob?
Well, no, not really. Although I think the first rehearsal was very much my audition. I think Glenn didn't really know me personally, and I think they checked me out. But you never really know what somebody's going to be like until you're in the room. So I could tell that Glenn was nervous. I heard this afterwards too, that he talked to Soren about it, because basically, he came into the rehearsal space. I was all set up, and we just started playing. We just counted to 4 and started. And my whole goal was like I wanted to come in and know this stuff inside out. Like I wanted to all sort of just not even think about it anymore, because there's so much going on in rehearsals and the first time you meet somebody, nerves, you name it. So playing the songs needed to be almost autopilot. So that's how I approached it at home. I spent a lot of time doing that. So when we got to rehearsals, I just knew the stuff. I just played. And I think Glenn was very sort of, positively surprised, sort of like, oh, well, here we go then. And that's also what I heard afterwards from Soren, that, once we started playing, it all came together, and it was just great immediately.
And that's a great outcome for any audition or rehearsal. That's amazing. So it feels like you didn't have to work up to a stage of knowing that Glenn approved. It sounds like things worked pretty much from the start due to your preparation.
Yeah, and then it's more or less, you just have to tweak some bits. Like I I was just trying to follow and play along, and also take some initiative sometimes with playing. And then if Glenn had sort of like, oh no, we're going to be real quiet here, or hey, take a solo here as long as you want. Like he would give me the liberty to just do whatever I wanted in certain solos and go as long as I wanted, almost from the get go, which was really cool. But yeah, you're just kind of tweaking to just make the show work and make follow what he wants. Because I listened to a lot of live stuff over the years and a lot of the stuff from the '70s, and basically in rehearsal, I kind of more or less learned what he wants to do now, which is slightly different takes on certain songs. And so yeah, we just kind of got to work.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, really. And obviously your previous work prior to that paid off. And so I do want to cover a number of the other artists you've worked with, and apologies, I won't have necessarily got the timeline here right, but I'm just going to jump to Walter Trout, another amazing artist. How did that gig come about, and what was the learning experience for you there?
Well, I knew Walter. I've known Walter for quite a while. Because being on the blues scene, playing with different people, you just end up bumping into each other. I think one of my first big sort of international things was a trip to India with Dana Fuchs, which was some of my first touring experience. And when we got to India, one of the first people I met was Walter, because he was playing the same festival. And when I left, because I was in a band in the UK called King, when I left them, Walter invited me up to jam with him. He was on a UK tour. I don't remember where it was, but he invited me to come down, maybe Southampton or something. He invited me to come down. We jammed. That was just a lot of fun. And I think then Corona happened, and he has a Danish wife. So he escaped Los Angeles and all the craziness over there to go to Denmark. And he lives up north where there's like nobody around. So it's safe, he has a compromised immune system with the liver transplant. So he was safe out there. And when I heard that he was in Denmark and I was in Denmark, I just sent him a message like, hey, if you ever want to, do a fun Danish blues gig or something. I wasn't thinking this is going to be a thing, but it was just like, while you're here, if you want to do something, let's have some fun. And I think he managed to get some gigs going, but at that point it wasn't possible to fly the American band out yet. It was too many restrictions. So he asked if I could do it.
And what was that like for you, as far as, again, different music, but blues? Just felt like you slotted right in, or was there an adjustment for you there?
It felt very natural. Very quickly. I mean, I did the same thing. I think he sent me maybe like 15 songs to learn, and I learned about 35 or 40. So I went through the songs he sent me. I went through a lot of live albums. I just checked out YouTube. You can get full concerts nowadays on YouTube. So I just looked for the most recent stuff. Like, oh, okay, he plays this song that way, and I just went through songs that I liked that were he played on albums years ago or whatever. So I just tried to get a sort of a well-rounded sort of sense of his repertoire. So when we came into rehearsal, we went through a bunch of the songs he sent me, and I basically said, well, how about this one? How about that one? I know 20 other songs if you want to do them. And I think that was a lot of fun, and it definitely sort of stimulated Walter to like, all right, let's do it. But yeah, it almost like, because it's blues and it's really my thing, and Walter, is a great legend. It all felt natural to me to kind of just play with him. It was just fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so let's take a bit of a sidestep. You've mentioned a number of times about your love for blues, and we talked earlier about, your teenage years and that. When was it that blues became the thing? And I assume it's when you're in the UK and the British blues scene, because we'll talk about Bernie in a little while as well. Just what was the moment where you thought blues is really my central thing?
To be fair, that's as young as well. I remember when I started playing keyboards when I was 7, and I was going through these like little learning books pretty quickly. You know, you learn to read music, and it's all the children's songs and stuff. And I remember getting, you know, a few of these lessons in, or from these little bookies. There was a boogie somewhere in this book, and it was very basic. But I was on page, let's say page 5, and this boogie was on page 20. I just skipped everything and went straight to page 20 because that's what I wanted to do. That was fun. My dad played blues. Some of my earliest memories are listening to blues stuff. So I think it was always there in a way. You know, I didn't make that choice. I didn't have that realization. It was just, that's my comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's what I feel the most, really, when it comes down to it. A really good shuffle and some real emotive playing. Because I know, you know, blues is not considered a difficult genre, but it's all about the emotion and the ability to express yourself within that genre. And as soon as that's done right, I'm in. You know, I just feel that.
Absolutely. And are there blues artists you've played with, and you've played with so many, but are there blues artists that stand out for you that you've particularly enjoyed playing with, that you feel like you've slotted in there perfectly?
Well, I've had the benefit of playing with a lot of people that I really highly respect, and, you know, bought tickets for to go see, and being able to play with them has been it's been a great thrill. To me, there's a lot of highlights, to be honest. You know, we recently played with Bonamassa, which is really great. You know, he always brings something where you're like, all right, okay. But I had the chance to play with Bernard Allison for a little bit. And Luther Allison, his dad, is one of my highest, you know, my biggest influence. I just love him. So, and Bernard is, you know, cut from the same cloth, as I say. He's got that same, you know, that core thing that it's just great. Listening to Bernard play guitar on his own is like, there it is. So being able to play with him, and we did a few shows, and we started with a rehearsal, and I you know, it sounds like I do this all the time, but I tried to learn the stuff as good as I could. So I tried, there's a lot of breaks and a lot of little gimmicks, and I just tried to follow all of that. And again, just have fun with it. And the band, George and Matt on drums, Matthew, it was just a lot of fun. And I feel like that was maybe my closest to, I think, the stuff that influenced me from the start. You know, seeing Bernard like right there and playing with him was the closest link I've had to, I don't know, Luther Allison, I guess.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And I'm also fascinated, obviously, you mentioned Bernie Marsden, iconic artist who a lot of people know from Whitesnake, but he's also a major blues person in his own right. Again, how did that come about? And again, what did you learn from that?
I've seen Bernie around on the UK scene quite a bit. You know, he does his own solo gigs. He would sometimes get up and guest with people. And I think the first time we actually got to sort of hang out a little bit and play was when he guested with Joanne Shaw Taylor. I was playing with her. We did a festival in Switzerland, and he was the special guest. So when we got there, we just got, you know, we're in the same hotel, and we're just hanging out backstage, and we just started talking, and Old Blues came up. Because he's a big fan, a great love of the old blues stuff. So we just started talking about that, and we all we know the same things. You know, we know the same songs we love, the same artists, and the same, you know, little, like, do you know this version? Oh yeah, I know that version. That was a lot of fun, and then we just bumped into each other a few times over the years, and the last time before I sort of started playing with him was on a Bonamassa cruise, Keeping the Blues Alive at Sea. And again, you know, I just went to see him play, and it was great, and we chatted a bit afterwards. His family was there too, and it was just nice. You know, I didn't expect anything to come out of it. It was just a nice hang. And then he called me or texted me that there were some gigs coming up, and if I was interested in doing that. And there was some there was some cool stuff because the first one was it's called HRH. Was it blues or HRH rock in England? But it's a pretty big festival. I mean, he played the big room, the headline slot. So unrehearsed, we just went on stage and played for, I don't know, 5,000 people, I guess, something like that. And I got in the set list from Bernie that he didn't stick to at all. He started playing songs that he didn't tell me that we were going to do. There was a Whitesnake song in there that he didn't tell me we were going to do. It wasn't even one he wrote. It's just one that Coverdale wrote, and he just really liked, and he just threw it in there. And I just happened to kind of listen to it a little bit on the way over there. So I was just like, oh god, something E minor. Let's hope for the best. And one of the last ones on that little run was in London, and Bonamassa was doing his Royal Tea album at the time, so he guested with Bernie. So in a matter of like a week, it was a roller coaster of things going on and doing these shows, and it was a lot of fun. And Bernie definitely, the Whitesnake stuff, but the way he plays anyway, it's I can totally tell where it comes from the blues influence, but it's a lot heavier when he plays. It's Marshalls cranked up. So some of the subtleties that you would play on maybe some quieter blues stuff, that's out the window. You gotta rock it. But coming from blues, there's a way of doing it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're obviously a man, Bob, that rocks it well. But I do want to call out an artist you work with, and I listened to the album in full last night, just one of many, Christine Baird. Your Hammond work on that is amazing, and you're not rocking it out there. You're showing another whole other side to your playing. Tell us. I mean, it's fair to say it's country. I would argue it's this beautiful country sort of folk music. Tell us about how that came about.
I want to say this was somewhere around the start of the Corona years.
Yeah, it was around there, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I was just trying to figure out, like, all right, there's no touring, there's no anything right now. What can I do? So I just tried to put myself out there as much as I could for, like, if you want any remote recording done, I can send you the tracks. I've got a whole setup here around me where I can just plug and play whatever I want. And her producer got in touch with me, needing some Hammond parts. It was as simple as that. Like, would you be interested in playing some stuff on this? And I think I just did one or two songs as kind of like a test. Like, well, here's what I've done with them. What do you think? And that led to doing a few more tracks. And we actually spoke recently that she would like me on some more stuff coming up. But yeah, it felt kind of natural again. I feel like country music, especially the tunes she has, is there's a big overlap. It isn't like that genre has an entirely unique way of playing it. And on Hammond especially, a lot of the times you're padding it out behind the guitar player, and you just more or less, my approach anyway, is trying to create a sound that really works. A sound that is maybe unique to the song, but where you're just gonna add to what's already there, trying to make other instruments and the vocals, sound good, and try to support that. But yeah, it just feels natural with the stuff that I've already done.
Yeah.
Pop music, blues, country. There's a big spot where they all meet in the middle, I think.
No, that's exactly right. And you mentioned before that most keyboard players would not necessarily pick up the difference between a Vent and a Leslie. On that album, were you playing Hammond with Leslie? Because it sounded wonderful to me. So if you weren't, I'm definitely been fooled.
Oh yeah. No, I've definitely played Leslie on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounded brilliant.
Yeah, I tried to. Well, it depends on the recording budget, I suppose, and how much time is there. Because I sometimes will just track Hammond and go straight into the interface that I have, and do a little Leslie simulator on the computer, just to kind of get an idea for the song and not having to mic everything up and because I'm not in a position where everything stays mic'd up all the time. I go on tour, stuff gets moved around, and sometimes if it's just to get an idea, I will just do it quick. But when it comes down to like, all right, here we go. This is the actual recording. I will sometimes reamp it. So whatever I've got in the computer, I'll just run that through the Leslie. But I prefer going just straight into the Leslie, one take, start to finish, and record that way. It's just
Yeah.
the most. I find that it works the best in the mix. Like you can get these really crystal clear recordings nowadays by doing everything digital and in the box. And I sometimes find that making that fit in a mix is really difficult because you got acoustic instruments and then you've got the instruments that are just not bone dry, but going directly into your interface. And I find as soon as you put something in a room with a microphone, it tends to just mix well. You know, it
Yeah.
just kind of works, even if it's on its own, doesn't sound perfect. Perfect
Yeah.
is it's not a term that goes well with music. You know, it doesn't really exist.
Agreed. Yeah,
And
no,
a bit of air
absolutely.
around an instrument is a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, very important. No, great point. And I know you do, when you've got time, Bob, a little bit of teaching yourself from all those amazing experiences. How's that shaped how you teach others? What's your approach to teaching people if they are lucky enough to spend time with you as a student?
Well, I used to, but when I just got out of school and tried to kind of make my way, I was teaching music schools. Having kids from the age of 6, 7 to whatever come in. But I realized that wasn't really my passion. What I do now is more or less, I wouldn't call it a master class, but it's more or less just a one-on-one with people that are motivated, decent at what they do, and are willing to put some time and effort in. And not necessarily somebody who's still, at the very, very start,
No.
trying to figure it out and trying to figure out if they even want to play at all. That's not really where I'm going for. I'd like people that are like committed. I've got one student. It's not really a regular thing, but this she's now a woman. But she started with me when she was 7 years old, and she was like
Wow.
this big. Yeah, her hands were barely big enough to play Frère Jacques on the piano, let alone play anything. And right now she's in this second year of conservatory
That's amazing.
in Rotterdam. Yeah, and we still talk, and cause she still checks in with me, because especially Hammond stuff, there's not a whole lot of people out there that teach it and teach it play the way I play. Not to boast or anything, but I just play a certain way, and I play with certain people, certain styles that there's not a whole lot of people out there doing it. There's a lot of guys doing the Jimmy Smith, more jazzy approach, which is also great. But I find that with her, we talk about blues stuff, we talk about
Yeah.
rock, and how would you approach this, how would you approach that, and it's really fun how that developed, and it allows me to kind of apply in lessons what I'm doing in real life, which is really fun.
Yeah, no, that's great. And look, I can't let you get away without telling us what you've got in your background there, because you've got some iconic keyboards there. So, and I was going to ask you earlier about your love of Rhodes, Whirlies and Clabs. So, I mean, you obviously, if you want to start from the bottom, what have you got there?
Yeah. Well, the real bottom is you can't really.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you
So I've
got
got
Rhodes.
yeah, I've got the Rhodes, and it's a 54. So it's a Mark II 54. So it's basically, I mean, it's a little tricky with the camera here, but
That's
as you
okay.
can see, it's missing the highest bit and it's missing the lowest bit.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but I find when I play Rhodes, this is the section I needed the most, and it makes it portable. You can actually lift this on your own and not, walk away with a hernia, which is really nice.
It's good.
Um, and I've done a few tweaks to it, because these are normally wired in. Now I got to say this correctly. They're wired in series, so
Okay.
all the pickups are wired in series. So if one pickup goes, they all go. No, there's no signal flowing through anymore. And when I got it, there was about 6 or 7 pickups broken on it. So I
Wow.
rewired them, and then I wired all the pickups in parallel, in groups of 3, which is what they do on normal Rhodeses. And it just opened up the tone so much. It just it sounds amazing. It just really it added a lot of high end. It changed the impedance or something, but it just works really well.
Yeah.
And then I've got the D6, the Clavinet, which when I bought it was black. And the previous owner told me that when he bought it, it was pink.
Oh, wow.
So somebody went and just took a paintbrush and painted the whole thing pink, then black with the really like the nastiest black paint you can find. So when I had some time off from touring and stuff, I just decided to sand it all down and make it look a little bit more like the original. It'll never win, it'll never go in a museum for being pristine, but it looks the part, and it, above everything, it sounds great.
And you've got a classic boss pedal there.
Yeah, I've got a little microcord here that I had for, I don't know, forever, which is just fun. It actually sounds really good. It sounds really powerful for what it is. I don't really play it that much these days, but it's still great. And then what I've done here, this is kind of my own build. So what you got up here is the Model D from Behringer. So that's basically a Mini Moog clone. And then I just built this whole unit around it. So it has the keyboard. Cool. And of course, when I finished this, then Behringer came out with the Model D with the keyboard. Literally months after I made this, but I still really dig it. It opens up the way a Mini Moog does.
Yeah, that's cool.
The whole thing. So that's kind of fun. It's a bit of a mess in here, but some other gear that I have here. I've got the Hammond organ.
Oh, of course.
So that's an old B3. Well, it's a bit of a something. There's a lot have been done to it over the years, I believe. It's not a straight up B3 anymore. It's got the guts of many different things, I think. But it sounds great. And it's mine.
Yes.
And what else? I've got a CP60 that you don't see a lot. That's the one over here.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, it's like an upright CP80, basically. And what's very funny about it is the keyboard folds down. Like you can open up the lower section and the keyboard folds down in it. And the whole unit becomes this kind of neat little package. That only weighs about, 150 kilos.
I can imagine. That's great. No, thank you, Bob. That's an amazing tour. And
no problem. And I've got a Wurlitzer.
Got the Whirly, yep.
And
you said so you've got a Whirly there as well. Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Yep.
No, that's thank you for that. That's right. And what's the boss pedal for the clav? I'm just trying to. I totally recognise the pedal. Is it an overdrive?
No, it's a.
Dynamic wah. Yeah, of course. Like of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I've got a whole bunch of effects pedals. Really, I've got a Qtron Plus, which was kind of my go-to pedal for that kind of envelope filter sound. But a good friend of mine, Johnny Griparic, bass player, he sent me his dynamic wah because there was something wrong with it. It wasn't quite working the way it should, and I fixed some pedals for him before. So he sent me his, and I plugged it in, and I couldn't find anything wrong with it. And above everything, I was just like, this sounds great. Like, it works really, really, you can get a good sound almost, immediately. And it just works really great. It just sounds awesome. So I sent the pedal back to Johnny and then bought one myself. Like the next day. It's like, gotta have this.
Yeah, they're classics for sure. Now that's brilliant. And and given the range of artists you've worked with, Bob, are there other artists that you dream of working with? So, there some people you think, over the next 20 years, I would love to be able to work with them.
It's just a matter of, when it's not on your radar, it's sometimes impossible to think that is possible. Yeah. It used to always be Johnny Lang. I've always been a massive Johnny Lang fan, and I was even once sort of considered to do a European tour with him, which never really happened, and I'm not even sure if I was really up for it, but there was a glimpse of it, and I was like super excited. But he's not out playing anymore. He's taken an indefinite break from I don't think his vocal cord. I don't know what's up, but that used to be the one I really wanted to play with. If I see people like, we just did this rock cruise, the Monsters of Rock. There's a lot of bands that I listen to that don't necessarily have keys.
Yeah, true.
But the one person I'm really envious of, but also wouldn't necessarily want to take his job, but Buck Johnson, who plays with Aerosmith.
Yeah.
Like Aerosmith is just like, I think when it comes to rock, they're just one of the best, if not the best. Still, I think,
Yes.
and their whole discography is just amazing. So just to be able to play with them would be an absolute dream. But Buck Johnson also sings all those backing vocals that
Yeah,
I could
that's the
never
thing.
ever do. So it's good to dream sometimes. I don't
Yeah, absolutely.
necessarily.
Yeah, no,
But yeah,
absolutely
that
agree.
would.
No, great,
Mm.
great pick, Aerosmith, Bob. And just you mentioned the Monsters of Rock tour. I'm really interested from a musician's perspective. What is it like doing those cruises? Because there are a lot of them on at the moment. A number of our previous guests have done. I'm just fascinated for you as a musician. What is it like doing those cruises?
I really like them. There's pros and cons, of course. There's a couple of things. It's you're sitting on this boat. Um, and it's a bit surreal. It sometimes feels a bit decadent, just to be on one of these things. Um, but what I really like about it is that you get to hang with fellow musicians, and you get to properly hang because you're stuck on this thing for a week. Nobody's going anywhere, so you get to see all the gigs. As an artist, you have the benefit that you can go backstage a little bit, and you got a little artist lounge, and you all of a sudden get to hang with people that you just look up to most of the time, or people that you haven't seen in a while, and now you actually get to spend a week together. Because this musician thing, and especially the touring things, sometimes it's, I don't want to say it's lonely, but you're out, when you're out there as a band, that's it. It's just you and the guys going out, and you barely ever see anyone except for like maybe a night where you get to hang a little bit, and it's like, all right, see you later. So being able to spend a week together and just properly hang, that's great. And then you often make new friends by just hanging out, and like we were hanging out with the Darkness. That's not
Yeah,
a band I
well,
would ever expect to hang out with, but it was great. Those guys are super nice, and yeah, it's just all very sort of low key, really nice, and that's what I really like about it.
yeah, great. No, great perspective. And I'm fascinated across all these gigs and tours you've done, Bob. Has something ever gone spectacularly wrong? Have you got a notable train wreck that you can look back and laugh about now?
Oh yes. Besides, breaking Leslie's at very awkward times
Yes.
and stuff, the one that sticks with me the most was the first time I was on one of these cruise ships. So the very first Keeping the Blues Alive at Sea Mediterranean one, Bonamassa cruise. So we got on this boat and we were the first ones to play. So you basically you board the ship kind of in the morning, and we were set to play at 3 o'clock on the pool stage, which is the big gig. So we had our biggest gig pretty much that afternoon. Sound check was all a bit stressy. They were still setting everything up, and we were supposed to sound check, and it was all just like, all right, that's right. Forget getting a good sound. Is it working? That was really all I could do. So I'm just like, yep, piano works. Yep, Hammond works. Fine, great. All right, here we go. Put some stuff in the monitors. Let's play. And then we start, and I realized, like, something's not right here. And I couldn't quite I didn't know what the hell was going on. I played some single notes at first, so it didn't quite, it's like, this. And then I realized, pretty early on, like, oh my God, this Hammond is up a minor third from what it's supposed to be.
Oh no.
Yeah, it was one of those things where the ship was running on American voltage, and
Uh,
the organ was European voltage, but it was missing the frequency converter, something like that. So it was running a minor third higher than it should, but the piano was still in its regular tuning. So I kind of had to make a decision on the spot of like, all right, I have to transpose all these songs a minor third with this hand playing the Hammond, and then the bits that I do on piano, I'm just going to play the songs in the tuning that I know. But there were songs where I'm doubling up on them, so I'm playing like, I don't know, a B minor in one hand and a G
wow.
sharp minor in the other hand, and it was just a complete mind fuck.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah, that
particularly
was that
playing
was a weird one.
simultaneously. Yeah, at the same time. Wow.
Yeah, and it was just mental. And I got the backline guy over, like, this thing is, you got to fix it. And he was just like, there's really nothing I can do. And I didn't have the frame of mind to go like, all right, well, I'll just transpose the piano because I was annoyed. I just figured, well, I've got one thing where I'm sort of comfortable with the tuning, where I know the chords, and then the organ, I just have to kind of wing it. And yeah, that was interesting. And trying to pretend like nothing's wrong was another thing, because I'm like, you have to carry on with the show. You're still on stage. People are watching. There's a good few thousand people watching.
Who
So
was
I
that
just
with, Bob?
pretend.
Was that with Glenn or someone else?
No, that was Joanne Field Taylor.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Wow. No,
Yeah.
look, that's an amazing effort. If I could dig up video of that, I would love to, but I'm sure there's nothing on video. That's just an amazing effort.
Yeah, well, I think there's one or two videos maybe out there somewhere, or if they're still there. But you don't really see anything or notice anything.
Which
I'm
is,
just playing, and I know that I'm not playing quite the right parts, and there's a few chords that maybe shouldn't be there here and there, but I'm just trying to get through it and look like I know what I'm doing,
is
and
that
not
one
freaking out.
is that one you've woken up with nightmares since? Like, is it one that you reflect back on, or once it was over, it was over?
Well, a little bit. Once it was over, it was over. I definitely felt the need to tell everybody
Yeah.
because it was a bit like you're not going to believe this. And what really got to me was like, this is a cruise, Bonamassa cruise. It felt like a really big deal. So I wanted to do well. I wanted to kind of play my ass off. I wanted to, us as a band play our ass off. So I just wanted to give the best I could give.
Yeah.
And to deal with something like that on basically the biggest gig of the cruise was like, come on.
Yeah.
That was gutting. But, we got through it, and I think we did okay. But yeah, I can still think about that feeling I had of like, damn.
Yeah. No, amazing effort. Kudos to you. If there was a medal for keyboard players, you deserve it. And and we also ask as a standard question, Bob, tag a keyboard player. So is there another keyboard player who you're fascinated about their career that you would like to hear more about?
There's a keyboard player in Nashville called Mike Hicks,
Okay.
who I really like. He's played with Kev Moe. He's played with Johnny Lang. Does a lot of Nashville stuff. I've
Great.
always been very Rascal Flatts.
Oh, yeah.
That was a huge gig. So I've always been intrigued by him. Michael Bluestein plays for Foreigner. I've
Yes.
always
Yeah,
liked him.
great. We've been in touch with Michael once, but we need to follow up with Michael. Yeah, great pick as well. And Mike as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Great. No,
I mean there's keyboard players like Lucky Doley. I always have a
yes,
lot of a lot of time for. He's just great, and
he is. Yes. No,
yeah, anything he does, I'm always checking it out.
yeah. No, three great picks. Thank you. And now we have the dreaded question, Bob. The Desert Island Discs, 5 of them. Tell us what they are.
Yes. This was tricky because if it's only 5 discs for the rest of my life on a desert island, I'd go a little crazy, I think. But I wrote some down. So the first one I have is Luther Allison, "Love Me, Papa."
Yes.
It's an album from I think '77 or something. It's way back, and I think there's like 3 or 4 slow blues songs on this album. But to me, it's the blueprint of what blues should be. It's all emotion. It's played absolutely amazingly. Not necessarily very, not very technical, but it's all there. Like there's no need for anything more. You know what I mean? And it's just great. Really love the Hammond sound. I don't know how they did it, but it just sounds fantastic. And Luther Allison's voice is just out of this world. And it's just an album I've been listening to since I was 7, and I still do.
Yeah.
It's one of those go-to albums. So I try to stick with albums that I still put on regularly, and it's like comfortable blanket. So that's my number 1. I've got Dr. John plays Mac Rebennack, because one
Nice.
of my major influences are just somebody I love is Dr. John. God
Yeah.
rest his soul, and I could take so many albums, like going back to New Orleans, Tripping Live, Gumbo. There's so many albums that he's done that I absolutely love. But Dr. John Plays Mac Rebennack is him on his own, just going through like New Orleans stuff, going through. There's even a Christmas tune on there, Silent Night, and just doing it his way is just amazing. And I will always want to play like him, and I know I never will, because what he does on piano to me is just truly magical. I know a lot of good piano players. I know a lot of guys that can play his stuff pretty good, but then when you hear him, it's just another level. No matter how good people are, like he is on his own, or he was on his own, in his own league. So yeah, that Dr. John Plays Mac Rebennack. I've got Hendrix live at Berkeley.
Nice.
I'm a massive Hendrix fan, like obsessed with Hendrix. I don't know why exactly, but just his expression and his flow, his going from one thing to the next and just being sort of wide open to whatever comes. I love it. I love the sound. I love everything about it. And Live at Berkeley is just one of those albums that just sounds awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, Band of Gypsies could have been on the list too, but Live at Berkeley just has a bit more. It's a bit more raw and a few different tunes on there, and I just love it. Then another one is Robert Cray, Bad Influence.
Nice.
And I know a few guys that really love that album. It's just when my dad played Luther Allison, it was on a cassette, and the other side of the cassette had Bad Influence on it. So those two go hand in hand for me, even though I think they're quite a few years apart. But I know every song on that album. I know every part. I could sing you every little aspect of that album. I love his voice. I love the songwriting. It's just great. And it's funny that, to me anyway, it's a blues album in a way, but there's a lot of stuff on there that explores just good songwriting, not necessarily in a blues form, but just good songwriting, and even the blueses are kind of his take on it. So he's trying out some stuff, he's going somewhere with it. And I don't think it gets the respect it should get, in my opinion anyway, for doing that, because he's taken it somewhere that I don't think a lot of people have taken it. Blues can be absolutely a bit of a purist game sometimes, and I feel like, well, we don't all have to do what Howlin' Wolf did in the 50s, because Howlin' Wolf kind of nailed it. You know what I mean? And what Robert Cray does, I just personally really like it. And I like where he goes with it. And the last one on my list is Coco Taylor.
Okay.
This is a very, very unknown one, but it's called In Session.
Okay.
So she did a radio show, a radio performance in Holland once in 1989. And it got recorded. There's not it's kind of like a bootleg, but it's Chicago. It's like the epitome of Chicago blues to me. Like the guitar player on there is incredible, incredible. Plays some of the best stuff I've ever heard, and it's actually been a big influence on me because I'm always looking for inspiration, melodies, and the way he approaches it is just awesome. And the sound of that whole thing is just, it's the best she sounds. And I've checked out many, 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 many live recordings. And that particular one, that radio show, is just miles above all the other ones. And I just play that album all the time.
Great picks. No, great picks, Bob. They're certainly diverse and well worth listening to. And we put them all in a great big playlist that our listeners listen to. So it'll be great to share those. And then we, sadly, we're running out of time, Bob, but we've got what we call our quick fire 10. So 10 short and sharp questions about your career. So I think we've answered the first one. The first album you ever heard, it sounds like Luther Allison was definitely probably the big pivotal one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No problems.
For sure.
What's your most important ritual before you do a gig? Is there something you always have to do to feel like you're prepared for a gig?
Get dressed.
Yeah, that helps. That's good.
Yeah. Just getting dressed up a little bit. I try to make it a little bit special. I just bought some crocodile boots, and that just kind of gets me in the zone.
That's a great one. That's an excellent one. If you hadn't been a musician, what do you think your career choice would have been?
Well, I studied IT for a little while. So or I used to be somewhat decent at computer programming. So that could have been one. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of construction around the house, and I'm really digging it. Just
It's a
building
skill.
stuff.
Yeah,
So
it's a skill.
yeah, who
No,
knows?
good.
It could be something IT. It could be something like constructive. You know?
Yeah, no, I love it. I think I know the answer to this, given that you play Hammond a lot. Transpose button or adjust on the fly? Well, given your train wreck, it could be either. But do you prefer? I assume you prefer to change keys
Yeah.
as need be rather than use transpose.
Yes. Yes. I'd rather, if it sounds like E flat, I will play E flat. Generally speaking.
Yeah,
With Glenn, I use transpose actually.
there you go.
And that's because I was told when we started that it could be original key, it could be half a step down, it could be a full step down. And I remember we were in Brazil and he had some voice, he started getting a little bit of a cold. So they were like, maybe we should play another half step down.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to learn all these tunes and particularly how difficult they are and all these different keys, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I'll stick to one and then I'll transpose.
Yeah, great mix. Favorite gig you've ever done, if that's possible?
I think the most memorable is Wembley. When I was still in Kinking, we opened up for Thunder.
Wow.
In Wembley, and there's one point in the set where I'm basically the only one playing, and then the crowd is singing, oh, it's like a big sing along thing. And I realized when sitting there, like there's about 10,000 people here singing along to just me.
Yeah,
and I felt surreal. That was pretty epic.
No, that is epic. Favorite city you've ever played?
Cities I like to visit, like I love Paris. I think Mumbai has left the biggest impression. I went to India twice, luckily, and I got to play in Mumbai twice, and just being in a completely different world.
Yeah,
I kind of dig that. It's a bit more special.
Yeah, no, agreed. Favorite song you've played at any of your gigs in the last year? Is this a song you particularly groove on?
I tend to stick. I have a terrible memory when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I only know what I'm playing at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a song with Glenn called "Might Just Take Your Life," and it starts with a big Hammond riff, and I just love that riff. It's brilliant. So every time we start that, and especially when the audience goes nuts when you start that, and again, it's one of those like, I'm on my own doing this. It's terrifying, but also exhilarating.
Yeah, no, great pick. And favorite music documentary or movie, if you have one?
Oh yeah, well, I have many. I mean, as a kid, still the Woodstock movie I watch all the time. I love that. But there's the Questlove documentary that came out on Disney. Is it Summer of Soul?
I think that might be it. Yeah.
Yeah. I watched that. I'm not sure I expected much. I didn't really know what to expect. And it completely blew me away. And there's a gospel section in the middle with staple singers, Mavis Staple and Mahalia Jackson going at it. And it was just like I had tears running down my face. It was so impressive. So I probably shouldn't watch it too many times because I want it to stay special. I wanted to, I don't want to go through those emotions all the time. But it's wow, that one is very special to me.
Excellent. Name one thing you'd like to see invented that would make your life as a keyboard player easier.
I have an idea. Well, would it make my life easier? I'm not sure. I have this idea, and feel free to steal it from me if anybody's listening to this. That knows how to do it, because I have this idea where a pitch bend, like the pitch bend on a keyboard, should feel and have the same kind of response as bending a string on a guitar.
Yeah.
So my idea is that the pitch bend is actually held in place by two strings somehow. That when you push it up, you can actually feel the resistance of the string, and you can actually sense where, for example, if you go a full step up, where you can hold it there and maybe do a little vibrating thing like you do on a guitar.
Yeah, I like that.
Because the Nord ones are a bit like that. They're based on tension, really, but they don't have that same feeling that I kind of want, because I play a little bit of guitar and I'm terrible at it. But the thing I love about guitar is that you can bend notes, and the way you bend notes in guitar is just, there's something about it that you can't do on keyboards with a flimsy plastic pitch bend. I want something where you can kind of lean into it and make it work.
That's great. Look, I don't think you should give that away, Bob. I think that's a Fritzema special. Trademark.
All right. That's right. My copyright.
That's right. And
I
what
said
do you?
it first.
Yeah, you did. What do you use to keep sane outside of music? So, what's your favourite non-musical activity, Bob?
Well, it sounds odd, but playing guitar, because it's not something I should really play for anybody else. It's just for me. I just love it. I'm terrible at it, but I love it. I'm getting I've got a family. My kids, with just being at home has taken up. It's become much more important, and making sure that our home is what it needs to be. I've converted the basement with my wife. We converted the basement to part guest room, part studio. Now we're working on the garage, and all this construction stuff is just so satisfying. Music can be a bit, you play the gig, it's music, it's sent out there, and that's about it. You know what I mean? Like, you do the gig, it's great, 90 minutes of adrenaline, but then it's done. And building something and having it like right in front of you, like, yeah, I can use this every day. That's great feeling.
Yeah, agree totally. And I think both at home and in your music career, you're building something really special, and that's evidenced by how busy you are. And we can't thank you enough for spending an hour with us during this time. We look forward to keeping in touch. You've got an amazing career still to go as well, and I hope the Europe tour goes spectacularly well. You're certainly coming into the good weather, and can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that. Bob was an absolute pleasure to speak with, and his love, you can tell, for boogie woogie piano, for the Hammond, it certainly translates into his live work. If you do check the show notes, we are linking to a whole range of his live work, and it's more than worth a watch. It's just amazing playing, and you can tell the passion shines through there. So a huge thanks to Bob again for his time. We truly appreciate it. And if you're one of our European listeners, definitely get out to hear Bob with Glenn Hughes in the coming months. There's certainly a lot of gigs in a lot of countries coming up. So, yeah, a huge thanks to you as always. But I also want to give a big shout out to our gold and silver supporters. So to the musicplayer.com forums, the Keyboard Corner in particular. The forums have been around for 20 plus years, well, nearly 25 years actually. And highly recommended as a great place to hang with other keyboard players and chat. You'd be surprised how many of our former guests on this podcast are frequenters of those forums. So they are something that both pros and semi-pros and amateurs alike tend to frequent, and we highly recommend it. Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Tammy's been a long-term supporter, and we hugely appreciate it. Thank you, Tammy. And to Mike at midnightmastering.com. If you want top-notch work done on your mixing and mastering of your own music, do give Mike a shout-out, midnightmastering.com. And last but most definitely not least, Brother Paul Brown from the Waterboys, one of the busiest men in music. And he never slows down, and that's because he's in demand and one of the fittest keyboard players I know, let alone how brilliant he is as a player. So thank you, Brother Paul. Let's wrap it there. I can't thank you enough. One last thing I did mention for those few people still listening, in my interview with Bob, we do have both the Spotify and Apple Music playlists, and you can check them out on keyboardchronicles.com. There are now over nearly 4,500 songs, which are the top 5 album picks from every guest on the show. I have to say it's one of the most diverse playlists. I'm addicted to it because I get to listen to all this amazing music that I may not necessarily know at times. I do recommend it to you. It's obviously no cost. You can listen whether you're a free user or otherwise. Just do go to keyboardchronicles.com and you'll see there's a section there for our playlists. So anyway, thank you. And until next time, keep on playing.